All right, welcome back everyone for another deep dive. Today, things are going to be a little different. We're diving into agroecology.
Ooh, exciting.
It is, and specifically the people side of it.
Okay, the human element.
Yeah, exactly. And to guide us, we have Roots of Resilience, this handbook all about, well, it's about building agricultural systems that are, not just good for the planet, but good for people too.
So like eco-friendly and socially sustainable.
Right, hitting both sides of the coin. And, right from the preface, they stress how urgent this is, which I don't think is news to anyone. We know the planet's, things aren't great, right?
Yeah, we're facing some unprecedented challenges, both environmentally and within our communities. It's a big topic.
It is. So what's the solution? Well, they lay out these agroecology principles, and they're not what you'd expect, at least not all of them.
Most folks, when they hear sustainable farming, they think about composting, right? Or crop rotation, the classic eco stuff.
Yeah, like take care of the soil, build a system that can handle a drought, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And those are definitely in here. They're called the ecological principles. But what's unique about this handbook is the equal focus on social principles. It's not just about the environment, it's about the people involved too.
Okay, so it's like, we need to use resources wisely, build a resilient system, all that. But that's just one side of the agroecology coin, right?
Precisely. And they break down these ecological principles into 5 key areas. We've got diversity, cycles, synergies, efficiency, and resilience. Imagine a farm using all of these. It's mimicking nature, not fighting it.
Ooh, that's a powerful image.
It is, and it gives us this really beautiful model for how we can design systems that work with the natural world instead of against it.
It's like, what's that saying? Work smarter, not harder, but applied to a whole ecosystem.
Exactly.
And they actually give a great example with diversity. They talk about a farm with so many different crops that it actually attracts beneficial insects, the kind that naturally control pests.
So you're building biodiversity right into the system.
Yeah. Which is way more clever than just, spraying chemicals all over the place.
It's not just clever, it's resilient. That farm is way less vulnerable if a single pest comes along and tries to wipe everything out. And that resilience, that ties into the cycles principle too. Think about how nature works. There's no waste, right? Everything gets reused, transformed.
Okay, so that's where our composting comes in. I'm a huge composting nerd, gotta admit.
I had a feeling you might be.
Turning waste into valuable resources. That's peak efficiency right there.
And you see those synergies at play too, right? Like you're not composting just to be eco-friendly. You're creating this nutrient-rich material that feeds the soil, which then grows healthier plants.
It's a positive feedback loop, just like nature.
Exactly. But we have to remember that this whole includes us, the humans involved, not just the plants and animals.
Okay, right, of course.
And that's where those social principles for sustainable farming come in.
So we're shifting gears a little from soil health to, community health?
Yeah, you could say that. The handbook lays out 5 social principles for us to consider: equity, participation, livelihoods, health and well-being, and culture and traditions. Each one focuses on ensuring the people involved in the food system are actually thriving, not just scraping by.
That makes you think about all this talk about, feeding the world, but are we feeding it fairly? Are the farmers themselves able to put food on their own tables? I'm really interested to hear how they unpack this equity principle.
It's about access. Access to land, resources, markets, you name it. And especially for farmers who've been, historically marginalized. Think about who traditionally gets squeezed out of the agricultural game, and agroecology is saying, nope, everyone deserves a fair shot.
That's pretty radical when you think about how much of our current system relies on exploiting certain groups.
It is. And they tie this into participation, too. It's not just about handing out resources. It's about giving people a real voice, involving them in the decision-making processes.
So more like community empowerment than just top-down charity.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, because they talk about the importance of tapping into traditional knowledge too. Like, hey, those farmers with generations of experience, let's actually listen to them, learn from their traditions.
That's a far cry from the expert comes in and tells everyone what to do approach, which, let's be honest, we see a lot of.
We do.
And of course, sustainable farming has to be about livelihoods. I mean, if it doesn't put food on the table for the farmers themselves, it's not very sustainable.
Right. It has to be viable for everyone involved. But it's about more than just survival. The handbook talks about decent incomes, economic security for entire communities. They're aiming for a system that doesn't trap farmers in a cycle of poverty.
Which, let's face it, is a reality for far too many.
Yep.
And health and well-being, well, that one's a no-brainer.
Seems like it, right? We all want food that nourishes us.
Exactly. But they seem to take it a step further.
Yeah, they do. It's not just about what's on your plate, it's about ensuring the whole system is healthy. If you're, I don't know, spraying chemicals that poison the soil and the water, that's not good for anyone's well-being long term.
Right, it's all connected.
Exactly. Agroecology aims for solutions that benefit that whole web of life.
I think a lot of people are already, like, intuitively making these connections, turning to organic food, supporting local farms. But I think what this handbook is trying to do is give us the bigger picture, the framework for how this can work at scale.
It's about connecting the dots, seeing how those individual choices fit into a larger movement for change. And they're not shying away from the tough questions either, like, can we really change the system when so much power lies with these giant agribusinesses?
That's what I'm wondering. I guess that's where their exploration of social sustainability comes in, which we'll have to save for the next part of our deep dive. But first, I'm getting a little hungry after all this talk about food systems.
Yeah, me too. A little snack break before we tackle social sustainability.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, so social sustainability. It's one of those phrases that gets thrown around a lot, but this handbook actually does a great job of, like, breaking it down.
Okay, good. Because I was going to say, sometimes these big concepts can feel kind of, I don't know, abstract.
Yeah, for sure. But they break it down into 5 clear dimensions, which, makes it much more tangible.
I like tangible. Hit me with dimension number 1.
Yeah.
What makes a community truly socially sustainable?
First up, we've got equity and justice, which we touched on a bit with the social principles earlier, right? But here they're zooming out, looking at the whole system, asking, does everyone have a fair chance to participate? Are the benefits distributed fairly?
Because you could have, like, the most eco-friendly farm in the world, but if it's, I don't know, exploiting its workers or driving smaller farms out of business, that's not really sustainable in the long run.
Exactly. It's about addressing those power imbalances that we see throughout the food chain. And then the second dimension, this is community capacity and resilience. So it's all about being able to weather the storms.
Okay, but we're not just talking about literal storms here, right?
Right. Although those are important too, especially with climate change and all that. But it's more about, like, having strong social networks, access to education, being able to bounce back from, economic downturns, those kinds of shocks that can really destabilize a community.
So, like, think about a town that's completely reliant on a single crop, and then that crop fails.
Exactly. Agroecology is trying to build systems that are more diverse, adaptable, so they can roll with the punches.
It's almost like having a diversified investment portfolio, but for your whole community. Spreading the risk, building in safety nets. I like that.
Makes sense, right? And then, of course, you can't have a thriving community without health and well-being. So this dimension is all about creating a food system that actually promotes both physical and mental health for everyone.
Which, as we were talking about before, agroecology can really support, right? By reducing exposure to harmful chemicals, ensuring everyone has access to fresh, nutritious food.
It's about making the healthy choice the easy choice, which I think a lot of us are trying to do in our own lives.
I am, for sure.
But it goes beyond individual choices too, right? It's about addressing these larger systemic issues like, I don't know, food deserts where access to healthy food is limited, or the way unhealthy processed food is marketed to, certain communities.
This is making me think about those community gardens that are popping up everywhere. It seems like they hit on so many of these dimensions, bringing people together, providing access to fresh food, building community resilience.
You're so right. And that ties into the next dimension, which is participation and empowerment. So this is about giving people a real voice in how the food system is run, whether that's through community gardens or, I don't know, food policy councils, or even just having a say in what gets grown and sold in their local stores.
Because when people feel like they have a say, they're more likely to, take ownership.
Yeah.
To make those changes last. It's not about some top-down solution. It's about those grassroots movements that grow from the ground up.
Exactly. And speaking of ground, the final dimension they talk about is cultural diversity and heritage. And this one I think is really important because it's about recognizing that different cultures have, like, unique ways of relating to food and agriculture.
Right. And those traditions, they often hold valuable insights for building more sustainable systems.
Totally. It's like that saying, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have to be careful not to dismiss traditional practices just because they're not part of, like, the dominant industrial model.
It's about respecting that accumulated wisdom, from those who have been living in harmony with the land for generations, which is something we've kind of lost touch with in a lot of ways.
We have. And preserving those cultural practices, it's not about nostalgia. It's about, like, maintaining that diversity of knowledge and approaches, right?
Makes sense.
A monoculture of ideas that can be just as vulnerable as a monoculture of crops.
This whole concept of social sustainability, it feels so, I don't know, holistic, interconnected.
It is. It's not about just tweaking a few things here and there. It's about transforming our whole relationship with food and with each other.
Big picture stuff.
Big picture stuff. And the handbook argues that this transformation, it has to start at the community level, which is where they dive into the importance of community engagement. It's arguably the heart of this whole agroecology thing.
Okay, so they've laid out the principles, they've defined social sustainability, and now it's time to roll up our sleeves and get to work. So how do we actually make this happen? What does community engagement look like in practice?
Well, they start by saying that community engagement, it's not just a box to check, It's got to be a fundamental shift in how we approach these issues. It's about moving away from those top-down, expert-driven models and embracing something that's more collaborative, more participatory.
Less lecturing, more listening.
Exactly. And they highlight a few different models that have been successful in, engaging communities around sustainability. So the first one they talk about is participatory action research, PAR.
PAR. Okay, that sounds a little academic. Break it down for me.
Think of it as like a partnership between researchers and community members. So instead of researchers coming in with all their preconceived notions, they work with the community to figure out what issues matter most and then co-create solutions that are actually relevant to that specific context.
So it's acknowledging that the community is the expert on their own lived experience.
Right. 100%. And the researchers, they can bring, valuable tools and methodologies to the table, but it's a two-way street.
I like that. What about the other models? All right, so we've got these different models for community engagement, but I think a lot of folks listening are probably thinking, okay, that's great for those communities, but what about me? What can I do?
It's funny you should say that because the handbook actually addresses that directly. And it's reassuring, I think, because it's not about everyone becoming a farmer overnight, right? Huh. It's about recognizing that we're all part of this food system. And even small changes in our daily lives can have, a ripple effect.
Okay, so give us some concrete examples. Where do we start?
Well, the most obvious one, and they really hammer this home, is supporting your local farmers. Seek out farmers markets, find a CSA, community-supported agriculture, that works for you. Or just start paying more attention to where your food comes from at the grocery store.
Yeah, it's so easy to get overwhelmed by, the scale of the problem. But this is something we can all do today. And it's not just about buying. It's about being informed, right?
Yeah.
Actually asking questions at the market, learning about the farms, not just grabbing the prettiest produce.
Being an informed consumer. That's huge because when you start asking those questions, you're sending a signal to the whole system, from the farmer to the distributor, that people actually care about how their food is grown, not just how much it costs.
And that ties into the whole voting with your dollar concept, which we have so much power as consumers, but we often forget to use it.
We do. And it goes beyond shopping, too. The handbook encourages folks to get involved in their communities, which honestly, I think is where a lot of us feel most empowered to make a difference.
Okay, so we're talking about more than just, composting our kitchen scraps.
Yeah.
What does community engagement look like for, the average person?
It could be, I don't know, volunteering at a community garden or joining a local food policy council if your city has one. Or even just starting conversations about these issues with your friends and family.
Right, because I'm not going to convince the CEO of some giant agribusiness to change their ways.
Right.
But I can talk to my neighbor about why I choose to buy from the local farm down the street.
And those conversations, those small acts of awareness raising, they add up. They create that cultural shift that's necessary for real change to happen.
Totally. If enough of us are demanding sustainably grown food, supporting local farmers, asking those questions, eventually the system has to respond, right?
It does. It creates that demand that drives innovation, that makes those alternative systems more viable.
And for those who are feeling, extra motivated, the handbook talks about advocating for policy changes too, which can feel kind of daunting, but I think a lot of people underestimate the power of collective action.
Our voices do matter, whether it's contacting your elected officials, supporting organizations, working on food justice issues, or even just signing a petition. Those actions, they send a message that these issues are important to voters.
I love that this handbook really empowers us to act on multiple levels, you know, from our individual choices to community engagement to influencing policy. It's like we don't have to wait for someone else to fix the system. We can all be part of creating the solution.
And that's the beauty of agroecology, I think. It's not just a set of farming practices, it's this whole philosophy, a way of life that recognizes the interconnectedness of everything.
It's about understanding that our food choices have consequences, not just for our own health, but for the health of our communities and the planet as a whole.
And that those choices can be a source of empowerment, a way to align our values with our actions and create a world that we're actually proud to pass on to future generations.
This has been such a great deep dive. I feel like I've not only learned a ton about agroecology, but also come away with a renewed sense of hope that we can actually create a better food future.
It's not going to be easy. There will be challenges for sure. But I think this handbook gives us, a roadmap, a set of tools, and most importantly, a sense of possibility.
And to our listeners, we hope you found this deep dive as enlightening as we have.
And remember, even small actions can make a difference. Choose to buy from local farmers, start a conversation with your neighbor, get involved in your community, use your voice to advocate for change. Every step we take towards a more sustainable and just food system, every step is a step worth taking.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, everyone. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive for another fascinating exploration of what matters.